So let's go ahead and get started here, folks. Just want to thank you all again for attending. Once again, my name is Ken Chiknovich. I'm with Summit Business Technologies, and with us today are a pair of experts from Diversified Insurance Industry. And today we're going to be talking about mitigating risk through cyber insurance and what you need to know, especially as a small business owner. So about us, obviously, Summit Business Technologies, we are a managed service and security provider that specializes in providing IT and network support for the small businesses in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. We have a combined almost 70 years of experience in information technology, and we specialize in managed IT and compliance for the general region. Joining us today are two experts from Diversified Insurance Industries. Diversified Insurance has about 50 years of experience in the insurance industry, and obviously cyber insurance is a new product that we'll be getting into today, and provide trusted, customized plans for their clients that help their clients be more competitive. So joining us today, we've got a pair of experts. Again, my name is Ken Chiknovich. I'm the Senior Business Coordinator here with Summit Business Technologies. And joining us today are our experts, Melissa Burk and Mike Papa. So Melissa started in the industry in 1995, and she is a certified insurance counselor and is currently working on her certified risk manager designation as well. She holds a BA in marketing from Loyola College in Baltimore and resides in Sparks, Maryland with two children. Mike Papa is also a certified insurance counselor, known as a CIC, a property and casualty broker, and a registered insurance advisor in the state of Maryland. Mike began his career in 1983 with Aetna and is currently the Director of Underwriting for Diversified Insurance Industries. He holds a BS from LaSalle University in Philadelphia and also graduated Maxima Cum Laude and has an MBA from Loyola College. Mike is married and has twin 24-year-old sons and lives in Perry Hall, Maryland. So I want to thank both of you for joining today and helping us talk about cyber insurance. So thank you. So just want to fire off here kind of the state of cybersecurity here and cyber threats. And I've got a couple questions for everyone here. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the first one. And the question is, how long after a business is hacked do they stay in business? So our options are indefinite, no big deal, 3 months, 1 year, or 6 months. So we'll give it a minute or two here. Okay, and Melissa and Mike, do you want to give us the correct answer to this? How long after a business is hacked do they stay in business typically?
I believe the response to that is 6 months.
That's correct. So we had a couple people who actually answered it correctly at 6 months. I kind of split across the board though between indefinite, 1 year, and 3 months. All right. All right, and so our next question here we can go over is, what businesses are major targets? Small businesses, large corporations. Who do you think is going to be the main target for hackers and criminals? Give it another minute here. All righty. And so pretty much straight across the board, everyone said small businesses. So everyone pat yourselves on the back. That is correct. 43% of the attacks that we see are targeted at small businesses. So anyone who says, well, I'm too small, I'm not a target, that's incorrect. All right, and our last question here. All right, so what is the best way to protect your organization from an attack? We've got install firewall, partner with an MSSP like Summit Business Technologies, enable anti-spam software, or enact multiple tools and strategies. All righty, so we've got everyone answering here. I'm going to show the results. And one of you did say partner with an MSSP. And while I do appreciate that you think that is the correct answer, the correct one here is enact multiple tools and strategies. So obviously partnering with an MSP is a good option, but we want to go ahead and look at multiple tools here. So anyways, thank you all for joining on this.
Yeah, Ken, and that's a good segue into, this is Mike Papa from Diversified Insurance. Ken mentioned that we've been around for 50, actually founded in 1969. To let you know where we fit in the world, we have a presence in Hunt Valley, Maryland, about 80 people. We write all kinds of businesses for their insurance, including cyber-related protection. But that last question is a good segue into the safety related to information and or cyber, as it's become known to be, can be thought of best as a three-legged stool, like three tenets to it. The first tenet of that strategy would be awareness, training inside. It's been thought that well over half of the breaches into someone's system come from phishing. We'll go into what that is, and basically people in the business tapping onto emails or texts. So awareness of that and having robust knowledge of what not to do, that's one of the tenets. The second tenet is have a strong IT partner like a Summit. Ken mentioned that. The third tenet is having a safety net, an insurance policy to help. And that's where we're going to speak to today, primarily. That third tenet, that safety net. What types of businesses should consider having some sort of what has become known as cyber insurance? I would say all of them. Contractors who might not think that they have a susceptibility absolutely do, not just for their employee data, but architectural plans, just all kind of breaches, that sort of thing. So we're going to speak to that third part. And the reason why it would behoove all of our business customers to partner with an insurance broker that has some expertise in this area. This is like the Wild Wild West, Ken, with regard to the types of policies. There were 50 to 70 carriers in the world that write this. Not all of them are equally able to do that. Some outsource, a lot of them outsource their help. The terminology is completely different from one carrier to the other. The coverage is different. The pricing can be all over the board. I just had a renewal that the breadth of coverage and pricing went from $2,600 to $13,000, all essentially for the same cover. So it behooves us to have someone with some expertise in this area. We mentioned that some carriers keep some of this ability to handle breaches in-house. And it's almost like a ransom team jumping in when someone's kidnapped. And that's because they have ransom teams in these carriers, because one of the breaches that happens is I've got your data locked up and you owe me money to get to release it. We'll speak to that a little bit later. So the timeliness of the report is paramount, because these folks jump on it right away, and it saves us time as business owners, because we have other things to do. So to get into some more of the details, I want to turn this over to Melissa, who was our in-house expert on cyber. Melissa, take it from here.
Well, that's great. Ken, anything else that you wanted to cover before on your end?
Well, Mike actually kind of hit a bunch of it here, so I appreciate that. Obviously, one of the big ones is security awareness training. We always say on our side of the house that the worst line of defense and the best line of defense against a cyber attack are your employees. So making sure that they are trained on how to spot and respond to potential malicious activities, be that a spam email or just not plugging in a random USB that you find on the street into your computer. Keeping up to date on the latest and greatest threats is a great way to stop that. And then, of course, working with a partner with cyber insurance is a great one. And that's really why we're here today. So, Melissa, why don't you break it down for us and kind of what is cyber insurance and really what does it cover?
Absolutely. So that's what we're here to talk about. What is cyber insurance? Cyber insurance is an insurance policy. It's a product that's designed to help your business mitigate the risk of cyber crimes and other internet-based risks, such as cyber attacks and those data breaches that we hear so much about. The cyber insurance can help fund investigations and can, more importantly, reimburse you for those losses. It can offer financial, technical, and reputational support that can protect your business from threats affecting your IT infrastructure, your information governance, and your information policy. So a question that we get all the time when we start to talk about cyber, even today, after sort of 15 years of this becoming more of a mainstream coverage, is don't any of those policies that I already have on my shelf that I'm already paying for, don't they cover this already? In the short answer is no. We're going to talk a little bit later about some enhancement endorsements that throw some cyber coverage into maybe some of your existing policies. But by and large, your policies don't cover cyber. They weren't underwritten considering the cyber exposure. Property insurance policies provide coverage for loss or damage to tangible property, things you can touch. And electronic data is clearly called out in the policies. And if it wasn't 15 years ago, it is now, to say that electronic data is not tangible property. Your general liability policies provide you bodily injury and property damage coverage for things that you're legally liable for. Any property in your care, custody, and control, your client's property in your care, custody, and control is excluded from that coverage. So do not count on your existing policies to properly cover you for cyber exposures.
That's definitely good to know. So if you're looking at a cyber insurance policy, what are some things that you need to consider when you're reviewing those policies and speaking to an insurance broker?
So this is a really good question, and it's not a short answer.
Okay.
In the world of cyber insurance, if you have 50 markets that write cyber policies, you have 50 different policy forms. In the world of your other lines of insurance, property and liability, generally the forms are the same or nearly identical. Sure, every carrier may add on their enhancement endorsement with a suite of additional coverages unique to that carrier. The property and liability forms are generally the same. So it's simple to compare carrier to carrier. In the cyber world, the policy forms are completely different. They don't even call a claim the same thing in each policy. We have some carriers that call it a claim, some call it a glitch. I think one calls it a mishap. So it's all very, very different, which is why we're going to spend several slides on what you need to look at when buying a cyber policy, because they are different. They are as different as each of your businesses is different. So the first thing that we want to look at is what types of data is your policy covering, and does it match with the types of data that you have exposed? So PII and PHI, personally identifiable information, protected health information. If you are working with storing that information, you need to be sure your policy is going to cover it. How about non-public data? This could be corporate data on your clients. It could be sensitive corporate data. Is that covered if it were breached? And then you have non-electronic data. I know we're talking about cyber and a lot of electronic information. Paper files are still a source of data breach if they are exposed to theft or loss. If you are dealing with paper files, make sure that your policy covers them.
Excellent. And obviously, any data these days can be monetized and used by criminals. So any
Absolutely.
data is always kind of, if you're storing anything, always something that you want to have protected.
We also want to consider liability coverage. So does your policy include liability coverage if you are sued for failing to properly safeguard and protect your client's data? Liability coverage is going to provide you not only defense, but also settlement costs. So it's an important coverage to have. Remediation, this is a big deal. So should you have a breach, there's a lot of costs involved. The very first thing that happens is you hire forensics experts to come in and actually tell you what happened. Was the data actually taken? And these folks are extremely expensive on an hourly rate. So right out of the gate, you're experiencing some pretty hefty costs. The cost to resecure that data that's been compromised. Should you have to provide notification to your clients or credit monitoring, those costs can also add up. And here's where it gets tricky, because if you have clients in multiple states, every state has its own law regarding what is a data breach, how you need to notify, what's the time frame in which you need to notify, and how you do it. Can you send paper mail? Do you have to send a certified letter? So this can get very confusing, very complicated, and very expensive in a relatively short period of time. And you're dealing with timelines as well. When it comes to credit monitoring, some of our carriers are only going to pay for that service if you are legally obligated to provide it. We do have other carriers that will offer credit monitoring on a voluntary basis. So maybe you're the kind of business where your client, if you're in a financial services business and you want to do this, even though it's not legally required, if that's something that's important to you, make sure your policy covers it. Crisis management, again, the breaches tend to make the news and the headlines. So crisis management funds inside the policy can help you offset some of that negative press. Does your policy cover fines and penalties? Those are investigation fines, defense costs, and payment for the penalties themselves. The next one's a big deal: extortion and ransomware. We're seeing a lot of these claims. The ransomware extortion coverage in your policy, and sometimes our carriers that are dealing with these claims on a regular basis can sometimes recognize the footprint of the cyber criminal. So if they have recognized this criminal and they know, or they're fairly certain that if they pay the ransom, they'll get your data back, they'll use funds to pay the ransom. Sometimes they may believe that paying the ransom isn't going to secure the data, and those funds can then be used to recreate the data or resecure the data. So it's important to have a full limit of extortion coverage in your policy. Make sure it's not a lower limit than the policy limit. You want to have as robust a limit there as you can possibly have.
Good advice. There.
And then bricking coverage. This is a relatively new one. Bricking is when your device has pretty much become inoperable, as useful as a brick. Some of our carriers are now providing coverage for that as well. So that's something to look at. Are breach costs inside or outside your limit of liability? This is a big deal. So if you have a breach and you have $1 million policy limit, if you have a policy that provides breach costs outside, either at another limit or unlimited, that's a great scenario. Your policy $1 million will be reserved for payment of any potential judgments, and those breach costs will be paid out of a separate bucket. So that's a nice thing to have in your cyber policy. And then lastly here, does your policy require the use of designated vendors? Many of these carriers have negotiated rates and relationships with different vendors. If you, for some reason, you would want to use a separate vendor, know that when you place the coverage, that's the time to discuss that with your carrier, not at the time of a loss.
Excellent. No, that's a lot to take in there. And obviously there's more to go here.
Yes, there is more to go. Media liability. This is when your your content basically triggers legal action against you. And any business that has a website, a Facebook page, a blog, maybe you're on Twitter, any of your content, you know, could cause some sort of legal action against you. Things like copyright infringement, plagiarism, breach of confidentiality, an error in omission. So media liability is a part of a cyber policy. I am seeing some carriers remove this section in an attempt to keep their premiums low. So again, be very careful when you're looking at these policies and renewals, because sometimes these coverages are missing from those renewal quotes. The next one, direct damage and business interruption. You know, this is interesting. Business interruption, I don't think is something that every business thinks about when they think about cyber. But I want to speak to one of our own clients, and it's probably one of the largest cyber claims that our agency has experienced. And it wasn't a usual suspect. This is a business that does not have a lot of personally identifiable information or any protected health information. The only personal information they had is that of their employees. They are a manufacturing business, and all of their manufacturing is run by sophisticated computer equipment. And when that computer equipment was attacked by a virus, the computers were shut down for 2 weeks, and it resulted in a $500,000 loss of business income. That is a cyber peril, and that was paid from a cyber policy. So again, a coverage that we don't normally think of can actually be a very, very big deal. So loss of business interruption is an important cyber coverage. The next one is contingent business interruption. This would be losses from the interruption in a third party's computer service or software that you might rely on, and we all do. All of our businesses rely on these third parties. So the contingent business interruption is another coverage that you want to make sure that you have if you rely on those third party systems.
And of course, just to kind of reiterate there, those third-party things are things like QuickBooks, your HR software, payroll software, which obviously, you know, all of our employees want to get paid, and if that's broken, that can be an issue.
Absolutely. This next slide is a big deal. We see a tremendous amount of claims in the cyber crime arena. And cyber crime every year, I think when I first started selling cyber policies, those cyber crime limits were pretty robust at $500,000. They've come down to 250. Some policies are at 100. And some of our carriers are eliminating crime coverage or parts of these crime coverages because they're paying so many claims. So we're going to talk about these a little bit more in detail. Computer fraud, this is when, you know, funds or property are stolen from you as a result of a hack into your system. Funds transfer fraud, this would be when a criminal deceives a bank or another financial institution into transferring funds from your account into their account. Social engineering, I think we're all familiar with this. This is when the cyber criminal deceives a business, an employee, into willingly transferring funds to them. And then this last one, the newcomer, is invoice manipulation, and we see plenty of this. This is when you're providing a good or service to a client. Before you receive their payment, that invoice is manipulated or intercepted, and it's basically causing the payee to pay somebody else. That account number or routing number are changed. And by the time you're following up on, hey, where's my payment? The client has paid the bad actor, and that account is closed, and that money is gone. So these are really important coverages. Be sure that you're looking at the coverages themselves. Are these covered? And what the limits are. There are ways to purchase additional limits for these, so something to be cognizant of. Okay.
Coverage triggers. So how do we initiate when you've got cyber insurance and the unfortunate happens and you are breached?
Yeah, so you want to make sure that, you know, and a lot of this comes out when we talk to your individual business and what it is that you do. Will you have coverage if you are sued for failing to secure data? What about a loss caused by an employee? And there's really two categories of employee here. There's the innocent employee, and we've all had this happen, right? The employee who goes online to sign up for a yoga class or download a lunch menu and by mistake introduces a virus into our computer system. That happens all the time. We call that an innocent employee. But what about the rogue employee? This is the employee who's disgruntled, they're angry with you. They know that if they can release some information, and I read an example recently of this actually happening. It was plans and specs that were supposed to be top secret, and a disgruntled employee released them. It was a huge embarrassment to the client, but this is a different type of coverage, and you want to be sure that your policy would cover the rogue employee.
Yeah, I think
And
we
then
all, sorry, go ahead.
And then there's acts by people other than who's an insured. So are you working with subcontractors? And if they cause a loss, does your policy provide coverage for that? And then finally, we can have losses from theft and disappearance of our private property or the property of our employees. So this would be, laptops and other media like phones. According to a Ponemon study, there are approximately 10,000 laptops reported lost every week, and that's just from 36 of the largest US airports. And 65% of those are never recovered.
Wow.
So that could potentially be a data breach. So we want to make sure that those laptops and the data on them are also covered.
Perfect. Great information there. So kind of go over the last little bit here that we have.
Yeah, so the final coverage considerations, I mentioned already that if we've got 50 cyber policies, they are all different. A great place to start looking is at definitions. Look at what's defined. And in the words that have definitions in a policy are in bold or italics or underlined. You want to make sure you're looking at those definitions. What are the claims reporting requirements? So at what point during an incident are you obligated to let your carrier know that something might be up? This next one, choice of counsel. The carriers, the cyber carriers, pre-negotiate relationships and rates with counsel that they like to use. Occasionally, we will have a client that says, no, I have counsel. I would like to use my own counsel. 90% of the time, their counsel says, no, really, this is not what I want to get into. Occasionally, we do have one that says, yes, I would like to be the counsel of choice. And at that point, we can go to the carrier and see if they will allow that. The time to do this is when you're purchasing the policy, not when you've had a loss, because that's not going to likely happen. So if this matters to you, you want to make sure that you're negotiating that when you're purchasing the coverage. This next bullet, if you're not going to read your policy, and I know a lot of people don't, do yourself a favor and read the exclusion section. Know what you're not covered for. That's the best place to start, in my opinion. And next, does your policy provide risk management services? A lot of cyber policies now provide some really nice reduced or free services that you could be taking advantage of that might, again, continue to help you secure and be a better risk. And then finally, what breach services are included in your policy? Is there a team at the ready when you have a breach, and what kinds of things will they do for you? You can contact your carrier before you ever have a claim and walk through that scenario with them. I've done that with some clients and their cyber carrier, just so that they have a familiarity with what would happen should they have a breach.
Fantastic. So obviously, we've gone over quite a bit of information. I know it's been a lot to digest. Obviously, just to reiterate, we are going to be sharing this recording and these slides with everyone that attended today. So don't worry, obviously there's a lot to take in, but you'll be able to review this later on. So sounds like there's a lot of options. You mentioned, 50 different providers and probably 50 different insurance policies. So is there a perfect policy, kind of a silver bullet to help everyone?
I wish there was a perfect policy. Unfortunately, there isn't. They are different, much like all of your businesses are different. So the best coverage for your business really requires identifying what your unique risks are, and then we match that with the coverage offerings and the nuances of all of the available policies out there. You want to be wary, and I said I was going to talk about this a little more. Be wary of cyber coverage that's added to an existing policy. Your business owners, your package policy, or even your directors and officers policy often have cyber endorsements on them. And I'm going to talk about why I don't like them. I feel like, these are not, and this is just my opinion. I think the carriers add a little bit of coverage because a really good attorney can find coverage in a policy, even though it's excluded. By adding a little bit of coverage, the carrier knows that they are on the hook for just the little bit that they've included, and it's not going to make them pay a full policy limit for something they never intended or underwrote to pay for. The problem with the coverage that comes via endorsement on your other policies is that what's included is typically third party only, doesn't provide you any of those first party coverages that you might need. And even if it does include that, the limits are typically very low or sublimited. Typically, those coverages don't include any of the crime coverages that we talked about at all, and that's where we see a great deal of the claims. The coverage in a BOP endorsement or a package endorsement is just not going to have the depth or the breadth of the coverage that a dedicated standalone policy would have. The enhancement endorsement is not going to include the breach response services that we just talked about. And I don't think I've ever seen one that really includes business interruption coverage from cyber related events as well. So they're very limited. They're inexpensive, sure, but again, right here is where you'd say you get what you pay for. So be wary of those. And finally, purchase coverage from an agent who's experienced in cyber liability. It's the wild, wild west in navigating the cyber insurance marketplace. The policies are different. The carriers enter and exit the market every year. The coverages change. There's new coverages, there's new exposure. So work with somebody who is sort of knee deep in this every day and knows the kinds of things that we've talked about that should be on your policy.
Fantastic. Well, again, really want to thank you for your expertise in this, Melissa. You've been doing this for a good bit of time. So before we open it up to everyone, as I'm sure there are probably questions abound, and if you do have any, feel free to put them in the chat for us and we can discuss them. Any final thoughts before we go over to the question section?
Yes, as we do this and have for, it's probably been going on 15 years that cyber has really made it into a mainstream policy for all of our insureds. A few things that we would like to remind you of. One is the application that you're completing the first time you write a policy and at every renewal is a warranty. So if you say you're doing it on that application and you're not actually doing it, you're putting your coverage on the line. You don't want to be paying for coverage that's actually not going to cover you when you have a loss. So remember that if you're saying it, you must be doing it. Things like multi-factor authentication and the like. And I know we've talked about employee education. Continual employee education is key. So no one and done. It's got to be continual. Those drip campaigns that are trying to catch you, those aren't bad. They're not meant to be punitive. They're really meant to help keep it on the top of your mind that this is what the bad guys are trying to do. And have a response plan. It's a great idea to sit down and say, hey, if I come in tomorrow and I have a green screen and it says you owe me 15 Bitcoin, what are we going to do? So, there are tabletop exercises. I know you at Summit can help folks navigate through, hey, let's consider what actually would we do should we have a breach? Because honestly, it's not if you'll have a breach, it's when you'll have a breach. Consider those third parties that you deal with. How cyber secure are they? And it's also not enough to just have a policy. Back in the day when we first started writing cyber policies, no business had a budget for a new line of insurance and more IT budget. So most businesses tended to just buy the policy. And in all honesty, our carriers didn't know what to ask. They asked a few questions. They gave you a really inexpensive policy. And fast forward a decade, that didn't turn out very well. So now our cyber carriers have gotten much more savvy. They've hired experts. They are asking the right questions. So you need to do all of the things that a summit can do for you to make you a better risk. That antivirus software, patching, keeping your network secure is vital. So you can't just have one or the other. You really need to have both. And then finally, again, having good managed security in place is going to make you a better, more secure risk. And that makes it easier for us to find you coverage at the best coverage at the most competitive premium.
So, and, to kind of chime in with that, one of the things we do here at Summit Business Technologies is obviously insurance brokers and providers are starting to require assessments or at least questionnaires during renewal time, checking to see what the insured is actually doing and whether or not they're complying to what they said they're doing, what you mentioned, that warranty process. So, a lot of times people look at that questionnaire and get a little bit confused, but a managed service and security provider like us, you can turn that questionnaire over to us and we can provide you with that information, fill out that form and then turn it over. And of course, you mentioned a couple tools in there, obviously cyber awareness training, we've mentioned that a couple of times, but multi-factor authentication, MFA, those are tools and software and configurations that we can help you properly configure, because if it's not configured properly, that's part of that, that employee error that can open you up for a breach. So making sure that you have the expert doing that work for you and get it configured properly will ensure that you are doing what you say you are and you don't run into a situation of you've been paying for all this insurance, but you haven't been doing what you said you were doing, and therefore you're not eligible to get the compensation.
Correct. Good thought.
Well, excellent. Again, thank you for this. Very helpful. At this point, I'd love to open it up to the floor. If you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll get that question answered for you. All right, so we've got the first question here, and obviously, Melissa, you mentioned that you and Diversified Insurance have been in the cyber insurance market for about 15 years. So, what's happening now in terms of that? And then kind of as a follow-up, how have you seen things change?
That's a good question. And it's interestingly enough, cyber liability has actually been around for my entire career. One of the first accounts I ever worked on way back in the 90s was a credit card processor. They always have had a cyber exposure. So the coverage has been around. It just hasn't been really mainstream, affecting all businesses the way it is now. That's really emerged in the last, I'd say, 13, 15 years. Where it's just exploded with the rise in the use of the internet. And then I'm also going to say, since COVID, I mean, when you look at the data from when the world shut down, the bad actors really took advantage of us working on our home networks, and a huge spike in additional activity. And that continues to grow. The criminals are getting smarter and faster, and with artificial intelligence, they can really do a lot more damage a lot more quickly than they used to. So back in the day, cyber, again, the carriers really didn't know the right questions to ask. It was very inexpensive coverage, pretty robust. And as we've seen time go by, carriers are paying out more in claims than they are receiving in premiums. And anybody that knows an insurance carrier knows that's not sustainable, right? They're in the business to make money. So underwriting has become more and more stringent, and that's going to continue. So coverage is going to be for best in class. clients, those doing and spending on their IT security and training, and keeping up to date with that. That's obviously one thing that we've seen. And we've certainly seen many, many, many carriers come into the market. We've seen some exit the market, certainly. And I think that's also going to continue. There's still great coverage to be had. It's gotten a little bit more expensive over the last few years. I think lately we've seen it plateau a little bit, which is good news. But certainly the message is that you have to be best in class, which means doing all of the things that we've sort of talked about, the MFA, the perimeter security, EDR, all of those things that we can do, and training to try to mitigate and prevent to prevent the losses to begin with, and then we're able to provide you cyber coverage should that loss happen.
Fantastic. So you mentioned a couple tools there, MFA, multi-factor authentication, EDR, which is endpoint detection and response. It's a more robust antivirus system that enables you to detect information and actions by a workstation or device that is kind of outside the norm. So these systems monitor things and say, Melissa's logging on at 2 o'clock in the morning and she doesn't normally do that. There might be something going on over there. So are there any tools that you are requiring a business to have in place before you even acknowledge or even review their application and underwrite them?
So I don't want to speak for all carriers, but I will say most of our carriers now, multi-factor authentication, most definitely, that, turning off RDP, vulnerability scans, pen testing, endpoint security, and then obviously data security, backups, frequent testing. And I think that's all going to continue to evolve. So, shutting down access points into the system that are not necessary, anything. I think it's just going to continue to evolve. So we're always on a sort of a constant striving to how can we better secure ourselves going forward, which is just it's a good thing to do no matter what. I think the carriers are also going to require that as part of their underwriting going forward.
So we have one here, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it here because it is actually directed at Summit. So does Summit offer a generic cyber policy that a small business can use as a model that would apply to the insurance discussed today? So the short of that is we do offer policy writing and procedure writing. Unfortunately, one of the things that you want to look at is a generic cyber policy is not going to fit your business like a true glove and can cause you to end up having gaps that a criminal can go ahead and drive through. So you want to make sure that you have a policy and procedure package written that is customized to your business and how you do business. That way you can go ahead and look at how you do business and then make sure that you have closed the gaps that those policies and procedures can go ahead and close for you. So a generic policy, it is not a one size fits all when it comes to that writing. And I think, Melissa, you'd agree to that of, something that's just generic is probably going to open you up for an issue where your coverage is not going to be triggered properly and you're going to lose out on those benefits.
Yeah, so I think the same applies for the insurance as it does for your services. It's not one size fits all. So it's really unique to what your business does, how you do it, and what types of data you have, so it does matter. And I think that the work that Summit does and then the policy that we craft will always be unique to your business.
Fantastic. No, excellent. Thank you for that. So, we've got one more here that's come across. So for those out there that already have insurance, how can they make sure that they've got the right insurance and the right coverage?
That is a great question. That's a great question. So you can certainly have your agent walk through it with you. I actually got into the cyber specialty by accident, and this was probably 15 years ago. I had a client, a software integrator, a Salesforce software integrator. So they have lots of data on their clients that thought they had this coverage. They were told they had cyber coverage. They had a claim. Turns out they had a little endorsement onto their business owner's policy that didn't even provide any real cyber coverage. It was called a cyber suite, and it really provided some coverage for their hardware and their software. So obviously, very upset client. We scrambled. We pulled together a lot of quotes for him. And he said, look, I'm not buying anything until I sit down and I understand these policies. And that's where we sat down and we read 9 different policy forms together. And it took several weeks. It's a lot of information. So sit down with your agent, go through the policy, ask questions. You can also secure quotes from another agent and ask them to compare. We review policies all the time. For clients, we'll say, hey, we think you're with a great carrier, wouldn't change a thing, or hey, we think you're really exposed. Here's what we would offer. Here are the differences. I know we have come up with our own sort of comparison spreadsheet. It's very difficult to compare these policies, but we've pulled out some major highlights, and it enables us to be able to illustrate on one page a side-by-side comparison. So that's something that I would be familiar with. And a lot of these coverages that we talked about should be on that comparison. What's the limit? What's the retention? Are things like bricking included, business interruption, dependent business interruption? So you want to see a comparison. And that's, working with somebody who specializes in cyber is where I think I would start on that policy.
Fantastic. And of course, not just someone who's familiar and an expert in the cyber insurance side of things, but also in the cybersecurity, understanding that if you're applying for something, you need to make sure that whatever is required, those multi-factor authentication backups that you mentioned, the antivirus, anti-ransomware software, those basic tools, and even more advanced things, that you do have that in place. We've worked with a few clients where they go up for a renewal and the broker says, okay, you need X, Y, and Z. And they come to us and they realize that they need to have that put in place immediately, and they have 30 days. So it's something that you want to work with your security team, work with your managed service provider, have a CIO that works with you and says, hey, this is something that's missing from your cybersecurity infrastructure. We need to put this in place. This is a glaring hole that someone can attack you through, and making sure that that's closed up. So that's, a good point of, work with an expert on both your technology side and your insurance side to make sure you've got the right coverage and the right requirements in place so that you are completely protected as best as possible. We say it here a lot, and obviously you said it as well earlier, cyber breaches and cyber attacks today are unfortunately not a matter of if you're going to be attacked, but when you're going to be attacked. And so the big thing is you want to kick that can as far down the road as possible when it comes to the when. So
yeah, I'd like to add in there, I think my favorite word in life and in business is resilience. So it's all about, look, bad things are going to happen. We don't know necessarily what they are. They happen to us in our personal life. They happen to us in our business life. The key is to be able to recover from them. We don't want to be that statistic that goes out of business in 6 months. So it's all about building a resilient culture that we can recover from and know how and have the tools to recover from the bad thing that happens.
So then great point there. Cyber resiliency, being able to bounce back and not be that, close the door in 6 months statistic. No one wants that.
No.
You want to be able to continue moving forward with your business. That's always important. So obviously went over a lot of information, and I'm sure it's being mulled around in everyone's heads. And I'm sure at the end of this, we're going to all wrap up here and someone's going to go, oh, I got another question, or, oh, how do I, who can I talk to about this? So, obviously, if you need to go talk, if you would like to talk to someone about adding different security tools and, policies, procedures, if you need more information, our information is up here as well. Myself from Summit Business Technologies, and of course, Melissa in regards to cyber insurance. So, feel free to reach out to either one of us with any questions or just, hey, comment on the presentation. As I said earlier, we will be providing a copy of the recording and the presentation for everyone as well. So don't worry about taking a screenshot of the screen here to get this information. We'll provide it for you, we promise. And so, Melissa, of course, I do want to thank you again for this information. Just kind of throw it back out to the floor, see if there's any other questions as we're wrapping up here. All right, well, once again, thank you all for attending. Melissa, thank you so much for your time today. I hope everyone really appreciated the expertise that you provided to the conversation. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack, not just in the tool set, but also in the insurance set. So, again, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and want to thank you all for attending. And we're going to go ahead and wrap up and give everyone back a few more minutes of the day. So, Melissa, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending. Feel free to reach out with any questions.
Have a great day, everybody.